So with this exercise, what we'll showcase is a workflow in which generating the surfaces on which you have to project your clean patches is not nearly as simple, easy, or straightforward of a task as just creating a sphere and using a section of that sphere, as we saw in our last exercise, when the camera movement was simple enough so that it was solved as if only rotating from a lock point. In this case, as you can see during the playback of this shot, the camera is traveling, covering distance into the scene, forward and taking that turn past that hill, and it would only be solved as a free motion camera track. With that in mind, our objective would be to try and, let's say, remove a section of those trees up in the hill ahead. And as I scrub forward and back, you can see the sheer amount of perspective distortion, which also reflects that bit of a bulging, that irregular curvature, the topology basically of that hill onto which we would have to patch up, we would have to project clean patches. So that would be the main difference as to how to tackle this. That would be the objective for this shot. But I also chose it as a nice example to remind you that for something like this, in this case, some dirt speck on the windshield, or it could have been a fly or a bug. Well, for stuff like that, the F rig removal node, the furnace rig removal node, is going to be your best friend, because you could remove this, as I'll show you in a second, at the fraction of the time it would otherwise take you. So let me show you how this file, this Nuke script file, is going to be saved for you with these nodes already in place. And I will show you the render that I ran through a rotoshape and a rig removal node. Let me just actually quickly point out to show you how that shape is indeed following the spec. If I look at the footage so that you see that it is going with that dot. So after I masked out this spot and then fed the mask as the rig mask, then I set up my rig removal settings to, as you can see, only have the frames but with reasonable movement, and didn't have to correct for perspective on this shot given that solid gradient for the sky. And then rendered the result of that. So let me load this so that you can see that indeed we have the spot removed. If I maybe cache half the timeline, it should be evident enough. So that spot gone. Okay, now for the not so easy part of the shot. Let's set this aside, and when you if you open the script or recreate it from scratch, of course, what you could do is just temporarily disable these nodes and then plug the rest of what we're going to be doing under that pair, so that we basically continue the same process on the footage, but maybe you render eventually in one go as one flattened result what is already done for the spec with what we're going to do for the hill. So what is happening here? Let me show you. Basically, again, for the sake of wasting as little time as possible, what I did was I animated already some masks for you, so that when we do camera tracking, you don't have to either watch me mask things, as I'm sure everybody here is already well comfortable doing that, and you don't have to yourself spend however long that would take you. You already have this couple of nodes which would give you the alpha necessary to plug in the camera tracker node. Okay. With that, let's, just to show you the alpha, there it is. So with that established, let's now create a camera tracker node and plug it after the rig removal. So in the 3D category, camera tracker, and we'll grab the mask input and feed it with the output of these two roto shapes. So then what we see, if I hit A again in the viewer to get back to the RGB, what we see is the camera tracker, which can now be told to use the mask alpha. Let's do that. And then when we go to the settings to show what tracking points would come up here, I feel like my pen is not responding as quickly as I need it to. Let's see. I'll crank up the number of features, again, similar to what we did in the last shot. Let's preview the features, refine the distribution, and we see where they land. Let me full screen and show that. I think that I probably want to lose the cache that I generated for the timeline playback so that my system gets kind of awakes a little bit. But as you can see, a lot of points would obviously go to the area that is of interest to us, but also quite a bit of a number will try to track that very subtle gradient and noisy pattern that we have in this footage up in the sky area, right? So I don't want that. I don't want to confuse the solve with any of these things, but I don't have any mask for it. So what I'll do is I'll try to compensate for this by tweaking the detection threshold and then the minimum length allowed or the minimum length of lifespan for a given tracker that would be taken into account for the solve later on. So let's crank that up, the detection threshold, so that we ask the tracker to pay attention to just contrasty enough textures and patterns. And I think about, at 0.5, we might be clipping everything, almost everything that would be landing in the sky. And maybe the rest of what lands in the sky would be clipped out by the lifespan when we increase this, let's say, to maybe disregard everything that is shorter of a lifespan, then, well, why not 10 frames instead of 8? Okay, so with that done, the other thing I want to pay attention to is, same as with the last exercise, we want to tell Nuke roughly what camera is being used, and that is the same exact camera that we used in the last with the last footage. So 4.8 by 3.6 again for the sensor size. This time we are staying on free camera solve, and again we'll account for the lens distortion if there is such noticeable lens distortion after the solve. So let's enable that. Focal length is again constant, so we'll leave it at that. There is no zoom in and out going on. And with this, we should be able to run the track, see what points we land in the footage, and then test the solve. Let's do that in the next lesson.